So thanks for joining me for this conversation today, Leo. It's good to see you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Very nice to see you too, Gene.
So I know I've told you this story. I'll just quickly tell those folks who are listening that as I started getting into doing more programs, live programs and so forth, I thought, why don't I just reach out to some people who are representing brands that I use myself? And Duracell, I think, is one of the most iconic brands really in the world. Everybody knows what Duracell is. And I was glad that when I reached out to you, you were receptive, and it's been very good having you be a part of our programs. And now I'm looking forward to this podcast conversation as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you for those very kind words, and thanks for buying the batteries. Appreciate it.
No problem. So let's take a step back because I know a bit about how you got to where you're at, and which is essentially chief IP counsel for Duracell. You can put it in your own terms if I got the title slightly wrong or incorrect, but you're a patent guy first and foremost. So how did you get into working at Duracell in the first instance?
So, in first instance, I was an engineer. So I started out in a product development group as a chemical engineer, where we're working on taking R&D type ideas and getting them transferred into production. So I was an engineer first. And then after doing that, I decided that I wanted to be more of an R&D engineer. So I went back to school and got a master's degree in chemical engineering, then moved into the R&D group. And then I had a fortuitous meeting with a patent lawyer who was working on a patent application with me. And his name was Paul Douglas. He's a wonderful guy. And and he said, "Hey, have you ever thought about patent law?" And I said, "Nope, absolutely not." And he's like, "Well, you should look into it. I think you might find it challenging, might find it helpful, might find it uh, uh, you know a good way to make a living." And so I started looking at law school and decided to do that. So engineering first, and then into patent law, and then first as an agent. So around that time when I was looking at law school, Duracell was part of Gillette, and Gillette was acquired by Procter and Gamble, and Procter and Gamble had an IP manager role, and I had gotten moved into that, so I was no longer in formal R&D, but started working on patent related things with the IP manager role, and then had another great mentor, Kevin Johnson, who was an associate general counsel with Procter and Gamble in the patent department, and he helped me work as an agent on various patent applications and had a dotted line sort of reporting structure into him. And then after going to law school and passing the bar, then became a member of the patent department, P&G. So little meandering route to becoming a patent attorney, but that's how it all started. So some of it my own doing, I guess, but really two fortunate meetings with very thoughtful and wonderful people, and Paul and Kevin.
Yeah, that story is probably not all that unusual. I mean, how having a great mentor, sometimes that probably is more unusual than a lot of people think. And it sounds like you had a couple that really impacted your career path. But I don't know anybody that went to engineering school with a thought, yeah, I'm going to become a patent lawyer. But somewhere along the way, when you're in college, that does present itself as an opportunity.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because I know one person who as an undergrad was going to go to law school to be a patent attorney, and it's one of my fraternity brothers from WPI. And I remember when he was studying for the LSAT, I was probably a sophomore at the time. I walked past his room and asked what he was doing, and he mentioned this, and I was thinking to myself, why would anyone do that? Spending all this time becoming again, your bachelor's in mechanical engineering. Like that sounds horrible. And it just goes to show, you never know what might change along the way.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, for me, it was I went into engineering school when Ronald Reagan was president, at the very end of Reagan. And I graduated when the first George Bush was president, and couldn't hire enough engineers when Reagan was president. And then we had the recession, and then nobody was getting jobs. I mean, had a 3.8, 3.7, 3.8, and you were not getting jobs. And all the grad school, and I was not doing that well to begin with.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the way, I kind of figured out I'm going to need to think of something else. And then the jobs weren't really there anyway. And then I went straight to law school. So sometimes good things happen just by one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think like it said, earlier with meeting Paul and Kevin, there's some luck along the way. And
Mhm.
I think when you look at a lot of things in life, career wise and whatnot, yeah, you can prepare as much as you want, but it does come down to right place, right time, or luck, or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting, how everyone has sort of a different road, but maybe not that different when you look at the base.
Yeah. So now you're working for Duracell, right?
Yeah.
And owned by P&G at this time.
Yeah, at the beginning of my, foray into law. Yes.
Uh-huh. And so then you go from being like the newest, youngest patent attorney in the country at one point, right?
Yeah.
Like where we all started at the very
Yeah.
beginning. And then you're doing the day-to-day stuff and you're filing and you're prosecuting. And somewhere along the way, then you find yourself to become chief patent counsel.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Was it just that you were there long enough? You were the first one, the most seniority. I mean, what path do you follow to become chief patent counsel, in your
So,
opinion?
yeah. So for me, I mean, I think it was again just timing. So what ended up happening is P&G divested the Duracell brand to Berkshire. So Berkshire Hathaway currently owns the Duracell business. And as that brand was being set up as a standalone business, a lawyer needed to go. And so that was me. I think if you talk to my boss, my manager, also a mentor, Gary Hood, he'll say that he selected me. I don't know if there was much of a selection process, but I hope that is true, and I'll
Mhm.
take it as a feather in the cap. But yeah, I was the sole lawyer that was heading off with the brand, and as a function of that, I needed to come up to speed pretty quickly on not just patent related things, which I obviously had a good handle on, but on trademark related matters or litigation related matters, advertising related matters, and a whole host of things that we would need to have some continuity between the former and the latter, as we try to set up the new business.
Mhm.
So it was the divestiture that really started me on this path. And then, maybe it's a little self-deferential, but you know, we don't have a very hierarchical legal department. It's pretty flat. We have three lawyers for the world, which is a lot different than a lot of big multinationals like us. Um, and so titles don't mean that much,
Mhm. Yeah.
and whatnot. But yeah, eventually, Gary had promoted me to chief IP and associate general counsel. I think not only because of the responsibility, but of the work that I had done and these types of things over the years. So
Mhm. So, with only three attorneys, does that mean that you are hiring outside counsel a lot and you do a lot of management?
yeah, so we look at outside counsel as members of the legal department and
Mhm.
sort of stewards of the business. So yeah, we heavily rely on outside counsel. Obviously, if we've got some sort of matter in Australia, none of us are licensed Australian lawyers, so we need to get get guidance there and have folks on the ground who can help us with those matters with any other country, for that matter, outside of the US or the EU where my counterpart is based. But yeah, we rely heavily on outside counsel and like I say, look at them as more of an extension of the legal department as opposed to just some independent vendor cost
Mhm.
center. Things
So let me ask you this, because this is a question that comes up a lot in the panels that we do when you're dealing with the interaction between in-house counsel and outside counsel. And it comes to mind when you say that you view them as sort of an extension of your own internal legal department. And I know a lot of attorneys have different philosophies, in-house attorneys, about, well, how much do I tell my outside counsel about the big picture, about what we're really trying to accomplish as a company, where I see the brand or where I see our portfolio in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, versus do I just tell you, hey, here's an invention disclosure, get me a patent on this, or here's a new trademark, I need your help filing this, and it's just really transactional, one to one, going back and forth. It sounds to me like you're more the former, that you kind of give them at least some kind of a roadmap. Is that your philosophy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one, we don't have a lot of lawyers, so we have to be more clear because I think that when I look at intellectual property assets or any assets, there's a business reason that we're doing it. And I think that if our outside lawyers don't appreciate the business reasons why we might be doing something or the strategic reasons why we might be doing something, then it's really not possible for them to give clear, complete advice as to what it is that we should be doing. You take, for example, a trademark application. Yeah, I think I got a good handle on how trademark applications go and how I would go about filing a trademark application. But one of our trademark attorneys has been doing that literally his whole career for 30 plus years. So he knows a whole lot more than I do.
Right, right.
And why would I want or why would I not want him to be aware of some of the things that we might be thinking about as a business where he might say, oh, well, did you think about the design mark? Did you think only about the word mark? Did you think about these other sorts of approaches? And I think it just leads to, number one, a better discussion, and number two, better advice. So, might there be things that I hold closer to the vest? Sure, there might be, but generally speaking, I'm more on the open side than the just get me a patent or just get me a trademark.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I always tell people I don't do my own trademark work either. Because it's the biggest, most valuable asset that I own is our
Yeah.
trademark. And not we have several trademarks. And it's so easy to screw up trademarks. And it's not like when you're a patent guy, and I've started as a patent guy, much, like we were just talking about, you think, oh, okay, well, I filed it, I can just fix it, as long as the substance is there, I can fix it. And oftentimes with trademarks, you're better off just throwing it away and starting over.
Yeah.
Now that comes with some risk and some problems and some maybe priority issues and maybe even more problems outside the US. But trademarks is not something for people to just dabble in, I think.
Oh, I agree. And even more so if you're talking about, products that are consumer facing or services that are consumer facing, right? Because that really becomes sort of your first line of defense, I think,
Mhm.
more so than maybe patents in a lot of instances. It's how are consumers looking at your product, the goodwill of your product, and are there confusingly similar marks?
Yeah.
And that's where you're going to have the ability to take some substantive action.
Mhm. So let me ask you, do you enforce your patents, or your patents defensive primarily? Do you license them, or is it really depend on the moment?
Well, I think it depends on the moment. I think that we have a host of patents in our portfolio,
Hmm.
and some of them are for various technologies, whether in the alkaline space or nickel metal hydride or wherever they might be. And if someone is to infringe on that space, we will obviously address it appropriately as the circumstances might be. I will say, generally speaking, patent infringement has not been an issue for us. Um, I think that generally with those in the space with whom we compete, I think there is a general respect, I'll say, for the spaces on which each one of the different companies and competitors are operating and where their patents might hold property rights.
Yeah.
It's just been how it's been for me in my experience. But obviously, we go and apply for patents for a reason. It isn't to just have a bunch of paper patents sitting around. It's to protect things that we're interested in and that we feel is important to the company. And if we needed to, we would enforce those rights.
Yeah. The reason that I ask on the heels of us just kind of kicking around some of the trademark talk there is because I increasingly think, and maybe Icky, your thoughts on this, that with respect to patents, particularly when you're dealing in the US, where um, there's just, it's not the same universe that it was when we started our legal careers. It's gotten more challenging for patent owners, to just say the least. And we don't necessarily have to hit that nail on the head. I think everybody kind of understands that. But what you need to do as the owner, you need to come up with strategies, right? So it seems like in other parts of the world, there are better opportunities to enforce. If you need to enforce, you can do it quicker. You can actually get injunctions. And I think that patent owners would do better to start thinking more like trademark owners, where with a trademark, you can't afford to have any damage. It takes years, if not decades, to build up the goodwill and people are familiar with you. And you see all the time with catastrophes where if it's not handled exactly properly, the brand almost never recovers. So you can't allow damage to occur. And it seems to me that that's sort of where we're at with patents is you don't want to have a bunch of damages that you're trying to go after. What you really want to be able to do is get in there quick, get an injunction, get them to stop, and then maybe get to a negotiating table. It, what do you think about that? I mean, how have this things changed in your view, the way you think about these things, if at all?
Um, well, I mean, I think that it's always contextual, right? So it's in the context of the business and of the space that you're operating in. When I look at alkaline batteries as an example, um, there's different nuances to older flavors, if you will, that come out. And, when you look at where everyone is sort of participating in the field, again, like I think there's a general respect for where people have their intellectual property rights. Um, and since litigation isn't something, at least currently, that, is a heavy specter with respect to patents, I don't know that it adjusts my calculus too much. Now, do I always think, okay, well, when we're filing for this patent or we're filing this patent application, is it going to be enforceable? Is it going to be something that will withstand a PTAB challenge or IPR, whatever you want to call it? Yeah, absolutely. That's in the back of my mind because it takes a lot of money and effort to get these rights. Um, from my perspective, where we have a lot of ongoing litigation, on a global basis is with counterfeiters. And over the last several years, it's kind of died down a little bit, I think, because of a lot of enforcement that we did, but with parallel importers too, which are all trademark related predominantly. Um, do we have, for example, design patents on our labels? Yep, we do. Could I bring that as a cause of action in a trademark infringement or against the counterfeiter in China? Yeah, I could, but it's the trademark really that I'm heavily relying on, whether it's the Duracell name or the copper and black trade dress. So for me, I understand that there are those sort of issues. around U.S. patents and patent rights, and I still think about them. I don't know that it as heavily influences how I determine moving forward with respect to a patent or getting patent rights or utilizing patent rights as if I was say in the um, you know, AI space or something that's
Mhm.
more software related or or maybe biologics or things that I have frankly no idea. But 101 seems to be a big stumbling block, and IPRs seem to be a big stumbling block for those types of industries. But at least in ours, I don't think it has changed things too much. Again, not that I don't think about it. You don't want to pay for, like I said, paper patents. You want to pay patents that have some value, and that when people look at them, or competitors look at them, or potential infringers look at them, they say, "Wait, I should probably stop." You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. There's so much there because um, more and more we've been doing programs and articles and so forth on trademarks, and I think trademarks are becoming for at least a section of the industry, incredibly more important than they used to be. And maybe it's just people are much more aware about them, and maybe it's just a function of when you're able to import things and very easily, very quickly ship them around the world in 24 hours. Now the whole world is potentially a competitor, potentially an infringer, potentially really criminal in the trademark area, right? So
Yeah.
what I've been hearing over and over again is there's a lot of companies that when they have the ability to go after somebody, and a nefarious character because they're getting too close to their trademark, or it is a counterfeit, or whatever it may be, then that they get really good results there. And then they lament that, unfortunately, a lot of the more sophisticated nefarious actors don't, they know that the trademark is pretty powerful. So they don't put anything close to the trademark, and they're not counterfeiting. They're just copycats. But it strikes me that for you, that may not be as much of a problem, right? Because people, I think, have a sense that, there's like one or two batteries that if you really want a battery that's going to be good and have a long life, you're not going to buy the ABC brand. You're not going to buy Jim's Batteries R Us, no matter how cheap they are. So it seems like the calculus for you may be even different still.
Yeah, and again, I think it's jurisdictional, right? So, like, maybe if you're talking with a U.S. consumer, their awareness, their appreciation of the more I'll say higher end. I know I just mean generally speaking, battery manufacturers is pretty high. When you're looking at other countries where maybe, money is tighter, cost is really, 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 really a driving factor to purchase. Not that that isn't so in the United States, obviously it is, but um, where you have brands that look similar enough, the similar enough is enough to change the purchase behavior. And we see this. So it may not be, for example, the Duracell mark. It'll be placed on the Duracell word mark. And more often than not, what we see for like the copycats that you reference is it'll be a label that looks the same,
Mhm.
and I think that maybe some of those actors don't appreciate that, okay, we have a trade dress that's also registered in whatever country that they're operating. And granted, maybe how certain courts or certain jurisdictions look at trademark infringement and the use of color marks and things like this varies. But I think some of these infringers or copycatters don't appreciate that that mark plays into the product that they're making. And, one of the things that we see is we used to have power check indicator, which was a thermochromic indicator on the side of the cell that you could press and you could get some sort of general direction as to how much capacity was remaining in the battery. It wasn't extremely accurate, but it was good enough. And we still see today that there are copycatters who will include that thermochromic indicator, but it's literally just a visual representation. It's not a thermochromic indicator at all. It has no function. So again, you can tell what they're trying to do. They're trying to copy our battery, just change the name and then say, okay, well, it's fine, right? Well, it's not fine. And, we've sued them. But it is very interesting.
Yeah, and do you have color marks on like the copper top or the gradation of from the black to the copper top, or how do you protect that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it varies by jurisdiction, but we have um, the copper. So, like 1/3 of the battery being copper and the rest being whichever color.
Mhm.
We have 1/3 copper, 2/3 black. We have the 1/3, 2/3 just color combination generally. Um, and then even when you look at our newer labels have what we call internally as power waves. They have a sort of like a tiny little wave that's in the side of the battery. We also have trademark protection on that, including design protection too. But we have trademark protection on those waves, also in the 1/3, 2/3 color combination. So yeah, we go heavily after all those marks. And clearly, what you can get does vary, of course, by jurisdiction. But generally speaking, 1/3 copper, 2/3 black, any jurisdiction across the world would be a Duracell trade.
Yeah. Th- This is fascinating. How did a patent guy like you get involved in this trademark really empire, really? I mean, because I think without exaggerating, some people are not, they don't use Duracell, they use, I won't name it, but everybody knows probably who your major competitor is, right? But there's like just two of you, and there's such, but so then that means that your portfolio has to be all the more strong, not almost to keep out the other major player who you probably have decent enough relationships as you've talked about. That you guys kind of steer clear of one another. But in a marketplace with two big dominant players, there's always the counterfeit. There's always the nefarious actor that wants to steal whatever they can get. So this is a big enterprise for Duracell. So how did a patent guy get involved?
Yeah. Well, one, again, I said this multiple times, but luck. And frankly, where I think a lot of it came um, was shortly after the divestiture. We started to see, or not started to see, our then CEO started to see a lot of Duracell bunny packs. So many people may not know that Duracell has a bunny icon, uh, um, outside of the U.S., Canada. You go to Europe, you go to Latin America, you'll see a Duracell bunny. And the packs that,
I did not know that.
yeah, it's another story for another
Yeah,
day.
that
But
has to make things even more complex. But go
yeah,
ahead.
it does. It does. But so when you're in, like, for example, Southeast Asia, you'll see the Duracell bunny on those packs that are intended for sale in Southeast Asia. And a lot of those products were being diverted to the United States. And, going back historically, whenever we would come up with these issues, I was always told, well, there's the first sale doctrine, exhaustion, and these types of things that are at play. So there's nothing that we can do. And so as I was saying, this was post divestiture, and our then CEO would go down, in Chicago from his office and go across to the bodega across the street and get his sandwich every day for lunch. And he would see Duracell bunny products. And he would say, whenever he would see me, he would say, Leo, what's the deal with these bunny products? Like, this doesn't make sense. They're not intended for sale here. How are they getting here? And I would say what I was told, that, well, first sale, exhaustion principles, you name it. And eventually it got to the point where he said, well, look again. So, so I went again. And then lo and behold, at least in the United States, that isn't necessarily the case. So under U.S. law, when there are material differences between the product that's being sold externally and the product that's then being imported and sold internal to the United States, those material differences can lead to trademark infringement. And so we started a lot of enforcement actions on this theory. And we were very, very, very successful in these cases, and rightly so. So we're able to get much more control on bunny product coming into the US. We're able to get much more control with, the third party sellers on Amazon and other marketplaces. And this was sort of my first major foray into seeing how important it is, number one, to have brand, to have material differences on top of that. And it really was, fortuitous because it was, our then current or our then CEO didn't want to take some, a lawyer's legal response as the end all be all. So fair dues to Angela, for pushing us.
Yeah, well, good. You never know where things are gonna lead for sure. Um, the one question that I also had, and I kind of previewed this for you in advance. That we're having this conversation at the beginning of December, and we'll publish this before Christmas. But this has got to be a busy time of the year for you guys. I would think, maybe more so than other times. Which, if you want to comment on, you can. But the real thrust of the question is, at this time of the year when people are in the Christmas buying spirit and buying toys or whatever gadgets that they're giving, do you see an uptick in counterfeits or people that are, maybe it's not counterfeit, but it is infringing because it's, getting very close to one of the trademarks that you own to try and dupe people into thinking that it's really you? Or is that kind of nefarious activity an everyday 365 problem, except in leap year where it's
Yeah,
366?
yeah. I think it's more the latter, to
Uh,
be honest. I mean, yes, you are right that obviously from a retail perspective, a revenue perspective, this is a huge time of the year for us and our competitors
Mhm.
in the battery space. I think that, um, if you're talking about retailers, we don't necessarily see an issue with retailers having counterfeit products. So this is good. As far as the marketplaces go, in a lot of ways, it's the wild, wild west. But yes, we continually scour the marketplaces on a global basis, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And I think, there are lots of, there are various factors that drive the demand for counterfeit products. Um, and I think a lot of that demand is jurisdictional. So when you look at some of the Eastern European countries, or things like this, China, of course, there are big counterfeit issues, and there are big counterfeit issues all the time. In some ways, you'll hear people describe it as whack-a-mole, and I think in some ways it very much is, where you can go after one legal entity today that shuts down and opens up as a new legal entity tomorrow, literally. And now it's not the same place. So anything that you may want to do against that new purveyor of counterfeit goods requires a whole new set of evidence and action and all this kind of stuff, is very much true, very much our experience. But I think it's a 365 or 366 in a leap year sort of issue for us.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
That's what, I hear that from everybody, it's just, it's never ending, the whack-a-mole. And from your perspective, it was interesting to hear you say you don't necessarily see, at least in the US, retailers having counterfeits. So is that fair to say then that from your perspective, it's mostly an online platform issue at this point?
Well, at least for us, and or at least in my experience, where I've seen the vast majority of counterfeit batteries in the United States has been through third party sellers. Some of them have brick and mortar stores and that's true, but they're not any of the major retailers.
Hmm.
So yeah, online third party marketplaces is a problem, I think, generally speaking.
Have they gotten easier to work with on these trademark counterfeit issues over time? Um, or, I mean, and I asked that specifically because I think what I've heard, and maybe, if this isn't your experience, but some of the larger ones over time have gotten much easier for at least major brands like yours to work with. Is that your experience?
Um, I think that it kind of ebbs and flows. I think that there are instances where they're easier to work with. I think there's instances where they're not so easy to work with. I think a lot of those experiences have to do with turnover internally,
Hmm.
to those legal departments, or to their brand protection departments, and their familiarity with us or with the brand. But it depends, I guess, is the main response. But I think over time, our relationship with a lot of the marketplaces, or a lot of the owners of marketplaces, has gotten better, and I think their responsiveness has gotten better, in particular to counterfeits. I think when you have some of the more gray area, gray market good type things, um, maybe not as willing to act immediately. But
Hmm.
but for the counterfeits, I would say yes. That we've definitely seen a, a, a an improvement in those working relationships.
Hmm. And do you use or rely on U.S. customs or customs around the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when you have a global consumer facing brand, it's something that you must do. I think it's imperative that you have very good relations with the local customs officials. Filing your recordals in each one of the countries is important, or not every country, but the countries that are important
Hmm.
to your business is important. And when you look at Europe, you can file your applications for action. This is very convenient, where basically you can get coverage throughout the whole European Union, and the customs officers talk to one another in the customs offices. So this is great. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection has been wonderful to work with for us. Very, very, very helpful. Lever rule protection is one of the things that we filed for, and this is to help, counteract the importation of parallel goods, which has been a wonderful thing for us too. But yeah, I think it's very important to have these great relationships, or to establish relationships and maintain those relationships with customs officials, particularly if you're a consumer facing brand.
Yeah. Customs seems, that they're not to say that others aren't professional, but that they are very professional and they seem incredibly dedicated to the mission.
Yeah, I agree. And when you look at the volume of goods that comes into the country, obviously they can't inspect everything, and they don't. But to go through the amount of stuff that they're able to go through and still keep, our borders open and goods coming in, and products flowing is really amazing, frankly. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
No, I agree. It's pretty remarkable. So I appreciate you spending this time with us here today. Before we go our separate ways here, and I let you go. Do you have any advice to a younger Leo from where you are right now, looking backwards? If you could give yourself advice on whether it be the law or career or maybe pay more attention in law school during trademark class or whatever it may be. What advice would you give your younger self?
This is interesting because there's times when I look back at things and, I say, well, I wish I really studied for the LSAT. I wish I really did better as an undergrad so that I had a higher GPA. I really wish that I went to a Yale or a Columbia or a Stanford law school and I didn't do night school and all this kind of stuff because then, I could be a big law partner or whatever. But I think that things work out the way they work out for a reason. And when I look back at, all of the experiences, sometimes it might have been difficult, working 12 hours and going to law school at night and all this kind of stuff. But I really think those types of things um, sort of form who you are in your character or whatever it is, your work ethic. I don't know. So, there's times when maybe you'd like to go back and say, well, instead of going left, you should go right, or instead of going right, you should go left. But it's really those lefts that you should have taken, or those rights that, or those lefts that you did take, or those rights that you did take that have developed who you are today. And so, you know, long-winded story to just say, my advice would probably be just keep moving, keep going, don't give up. It'll all be all right. It'll all work out, and just do it, I guess, instead of, trying to second guess. Things could always be different. They could always be
Yeah.
worse, but they're pretty great, you know?
Yeah, and that would be sort of my advice, I think, too, to myself. It's funny that we have almost the same type of advice because I think about maybe there's a couple decisions I made through my life that, I would like to go back there, maybe not had that extra drink at that one party or something like that,
Yeah.
just crazy things, right? But nothing really major. And the reason is because if I went back and got an opportunity to redo it, I would just make all different mistakes, you know,
Yeah.
and no, with the knowledge of thinking I knew what I was doing, the mistakes might be all the bigger. But I do think that the one piece of advice I would give myself is just show up.
Yeah.
Showing up and moving forward and being present and effort is 90-95% of life. It's 90-95% of your career. And it was interesting to hear you basically give that sort of same advice as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's right, and I would maybe just adjust the proportions a little bit. I would say that, at least from a career perspective, there's a lot of luck involved too, and it's like for me, when I think back at meeting Paul or meeting Kevin or meeting Gary, these are all things that I had no control over, but I think at the same time, when those opportunities presented themselves to me, I also showed up.
Yep.
I took advantage of their ability to provide me opportunity, to provide me advice, whatever it might be. And I think I agree with exactly
Yeah.
with everything.
And it's funny because there's a couple things I like to say about luck. The harder I work, the luckier I've got. And I'm
Yeah,
not the first person that has said that, but luck is when preparation meets opportunity,
yeah,
and so I do think you can make a lot of your own luck. You can't make it all, but if you are present and working and hardworking and you're one foot in front of another. I mean, I would never have guessed that I would be doing today what I'm doing. And sometimes I wake up and think to myself, how did I get here? But
yeah,
it's one foot in front of the other and participating. And then when you do that, occasionally great things present themselves and people notice you and you notice opportunity. And it's, uh, it's been a fun journey.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, just adding to some of the things that we talked about before. I mean, when I finished undergrad, I said to myself, I'm never doing this again. Like it's over, and then I went and did my master's work. And after that, I said, I'm never doing this again. This is over. And then lost, so never say never. and you never know where you'll end up. But there was definitely some breaks in between
Yeah.
each one of those parts of the journey.
Yeah, no, there is, but it's funny you say that too, because whenever I say never, I'm never going to do X, then whatever it is, there will be an opportunity to present itself that is exactly X, exactly what I said I would not do anymore. And it's like, oh, that's too good to pass up. I have to do that. And it's just funny. So my experience is always, if you want an opportunity, promise yourself you won't do something that you don't really like doing, and then what you'll have like in a week or two is a great opportunity to do exactly that, but in front of a bigger audience, in front of more influential people, whatever it may be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but
Leo, it's been a pleasure. It's great to see you again. I look forward to seeing you again at IP Watchdog Live in March, and I wish you and your family a very happy holiday.
thanks so much, Gene. Same to you and yours, and we'll see each other very soon.